people that are in need.
בריאות.
But you should say doctors and nurses when you say doctors.
Okay, doctors and nurses. Yes, David.
Rabbi, just a very quick question, if you don't mind. Based on what we learned yesterday, I went home last night and I thought about something because I know someone who's a Jew and he declares himself agnostic. Based on what we learned yesterday about good, wicked, evil, nice, whatever, how does Hashem look upon those Jews who declare themselves agnostics?
So I'll tell you like this. It's an interesting question. Today, it's very different than the olden days. You're asking a very good question. Can I use the word atheist? Is that a right word to use also?
The term is, and I asked the Jewish young man, very young man, was he an atheist? And he said, no, I'm agnostic. And he was.
What's the difference?
Well, and I asked him that. He says, because I simply don't believe in God, yet I don't fault people who do believe in God, yet I don't believe in something else. I just don't believe.
So here's the deal. There's an interesting you're bringing up a very interesting topic. It's a fascinating topic.
I don't want to sway and go into a totally different topic.
I know, but let me share with you. Let me tell you how we look at them today. In the olden days in the shtetl, when everybody went to yeshiva, everybody was raised in an observant family, in an observant community, and that's just the way life was, right? And then a Jewish person, went off the path, and they stopped serving Hashem, and they left Yiddishkeit behind. It was a much bigger statement than a Jewish person today not keeping Torah mitzvahs, not believing in Hashem, and so on. And what's the reason? The reason is because when we say a Jew today is not following Torah mitzvahs, doesn't believe, and so on, it's because they weren't raised in a proper Jewish education. So had that kid been born in a Hasidic family in Borough Park, you know what I mean, and in Lakewood and Williamsburg, he probably would believe in Hashem 1,000%. The reason that he doesn't believe is not because he knows it. Does he know Torah? He probably barely learned one real lesson in Torah, and he has an opinion that there's no God without learning anything about Judaism. He doesn't have any Jewish education. So the fact that he doesn't believe is silliness. It's not that he's educated and doesn't believe. He never even learned. So we call that in halacha, it's called a tinik shenishba. It's imagine a child who was captured, held in jail, brought up in a non-Jewish community. Now you want to hold him responsible for not keeping Torah mitzvahs. His parents never gave him a Jewish education. So we really look at him like he's not responsible for his actions because he never got a good Jewish education. You understand? So he's not wicked, he just doesn't know.
But that's not what I'm referring to. In other words, if you're from a secular family and you were brought up in a conservadox home, which applies to I would say there's plenty of people that are brought up that way, and they see mom and dad observing Shabbos, practicing being kosher, but yet they sway for whatever reason, and they become agnostic, and they defy what our beliefs are in Judaism. And by being agnostic, they don't acknowledge Hashem at all.
I'm trying to tell you, had that kid grown up in a real solid Jewish foundation, had he gone to yeshiva, between me and you, he would believe in Hashem. So my argument is that he's not a bad person, he just doesn't know. That's what I'm trying to say. He never got a good Jewish education, so I don't blame him for not knowing or not believing. I look at it, he's illiterate. How can you have an opinion when you never studied Torah? So if you want to give an opinion without studying, it's like me telling you, imagine I tell you, I have an opinion on the theory of Einstein's theory of relativity. I never studied science. I never looked into I never studied what Einstein says, and I'm going to give you, there's a lot of people today that do that. They give you an opinion about something that they have no clue about. So I look at the person, I say, listen, you want to give me your medical opinion about what I should do, right? With coronavirus, everything going on, you want to give me your medical opinion? Isn't the hate, but it's silly that you're even giving an opinion of something you don't know much about.
Right.
So I would argue that I would look at such a person and say, had you had medical, had you gone to medicine school, you would for sure agree with me. I know, because I'm a doctor, let's say. I know you would agree with me. You're just never educated. It's silly. It's not that the person's an atheist. They're being silly by giving an opinion of something that they don't know anything about, really is what it is. I'm not an atheist. I don't believe, if they would know a drop of Torah, if they would sit down with a real Chumash and a real Rashi, like in our class, if they would come to our class, there's no question in my mind that they would believe in Hashem. The point is, how many classes did they go to give an opinion about something that they don't know any clue about? And by the way, you want to know where they are educated? They're educated in our public school system and our college system, with all the professors are atheists. And not all, but a lot of them are. So their whole education has been taught to be agnostic and atheist. They watch the movies and they've watched, all their education in life has been to not believe in Hashem. So why are they blamed for not believing? Of course they won't believe in Hashem. It's not that they grew up with an education of believing in Hashem and so on. They grew up and they were pushed that to be agnostic. That's how they were pushed their whole life. So I don't hold them responsible for something which they would never got an education in.
But that answers it. Thank you, because I don't
think they're a bad person. I just think they're not educated.
That's what I was wondering. I was wondering if we would look at that as being a bad person. So I thank you, because you hit it right on the head. Thanks very much.
Thank you. It's a good question. I'm saying it's a very good question. Okay. So Harvey, your birthday is tomorrow, right? I'm not mixing it up. Harvey Karpinos, Dr. Karpinos. You're muted.
Birthday is tomorrow.
Your birthday's tomorrow. Okay, so you're dedicating tomorrow's class. So today's class is still dedicated by Ira. Ira Stein, thank you very much for dedicating 2 classes in memory of, what's the name again?
Leah Bas Yisrael.
Leah Bas Yisrael. Okay. May the neshama have an aliyah. Thank you very much, Ira. So I want to share with you about today's a very fascinating chumash. We're having a lot of great topics over here. And I'm going to talk with you a little bit about a levirate marriage. Has anyone ever heard in our class of a levirate marriage? Have you ever heard? You know what that is? No? I see people shaking their heads. Anybody? Yes? Can you tell me you know what a levirate marriage is? There's a movie someone told me once. I never watched it. It's called Loving Leah or something, they said. I don't even know what the movie is. A fascinating idea. And basically, the Torah has a very interesting law. Normally, it's a severe prohibition for a brother to marry his sister-in-law. It's something that's not allowed. It's incest, whatever. A brother is not allowed to marry his sister-in-law. However, if, God forbid, a young couple gets married, a boy and a girl, and the boy passes away, young, just married, has not even had any children yet, not had one child yet, and the man passes away, leaving no descendants, and there will be no name left for this man in the world, because he's gone and he has no kids, and there'll be no memory of this person. The Torah has a fascinating law, very interesting law, that the younger brothers, the mitzvah, not just is it a prohibition to marry your sister-in-law, it's a mitzvah for this guy's younger brother to marry his brother's wife, to marry his sister-in-law. So the unmarried younger brother who's not married yet, who's a bachelor, it's a mitzvah and he's supposed to marry the sister-in-law, so much so that if he doesn't want to get married to his sister-in-law, he's naturally, automatically connected to this girl as soon as the older brother passes away. And he needs a divorce, or it's not really called a divorce, it's not a full divorce. He needs to do something called chalitza. It's like he actually needs a separation from this woman, and he's violating, in a sense, Torah's view that he should marry his older sister-in-law, his older brother's wife. He should marry this girl. The reason why movies could be made of that is because what happens if the boy and the girl don't mesh at all? And now you got to marry this girl, and you're so different in personalities, and you could get divorced. It's called chalitza. It's not actual divorce. It's called chalitza. Or you could get married, and to get married, you don't even need a full marriage ceremony. You just do something called yibum, and boom, you're automatically married to your brother or sister. So it went from this girl bringing up prohibition, being considered incest, to marry this girl, to then moving on to being a mitzvah for him to marry this girl. Why is it a mitzvah for him to marry Very interesting mitzvah. Why is it a mitzvah for him to marry this girl? What's the reason? What's the logic behind it? Because the brother has no descendants. So by the younger brother stepping in and filling the older brother's shoes, a fascinating mitzvah in the Torah, his children will be considered to be the children of the older brother. He's kind of stepping in for his older brother as passed and creating a child with his older brother's wife, going to have a child with his former brother's wife, and that child will be as if he had children in memory of his older brother, and his older brother's name will continue to live on through his original wife and his younger brother. Fascinating mitzvah in the Torah. Fascinating, very, very interesting. Right? Everybody following? You with me about this fascinating marriage called the levirate marriage? Sounds like a cool story. It's a mitzvah in Torah. It's a fascinating mitzvah in Torah. Here's where it gets a little complicated in the Chumash today. We know that before the Torah was given, the forefathers kept the Torah. However, it doesn't mean it was identical. It doesn't mean it was exact. So this levirate marriage was in play. However, here's where it gets very interesting. Any relative in the family, doesn't have to be the younger brother like it would be the edict after the Torah was given and how this levirate marriage works. Before the Torah was given, any family member could step in, could marry the wife of the deceased man, and he doesn't have to be a brother. Could even be her father-in-law. Any relative could step in, marry that girl of the man who passed away, and marry the girl of the man who passed away, and their child could be considered to fill in the child of the young man who passed away. You guys with me? Fascinating, interesting story. Ira, you're on twice on our screen, by the way. You're walking and you're in the kitchen too at the same time. Is Terry there? Or you just left it on? Okay.
So, Rabbi, I have a question.
Isn't that interesting, the rules of levirate marriage? A fascinating rule in levirate marriage. It's still practiced till today. We do not do yibum. We do not marriage. We will only do divorce in today's day and age. You could go on YouTube and YouTube this. And in Iran, in the Jewish community in Iran, recently there's a video of the rabbinic court, I guess there's some Jews still left in Iran, of the rabbinic court performing this chalitza divorce ceremony between a girl and her younger brother-in-law. Yes, Lisa.
So the child, if there's a child then from the second sort of combination with the younger brother, would the child take the name of the older brother? Like, would it be like Ben older brother's name, or would it be of the younger brother? Because it seems like it's about passing on the name, right?
I don't know. If saying if they make him a sheberach for him or they call him up to the Torah,
Sure.
is literally the name? That's a good question. I don't know if we'll go that far. We don't do it today, so it's not practical. We only do divorce today. We only do chalitza. We don't allow yibum today, the marriage ceremony that takes place between the two. But in Torah, is considered to be the descendants, the offspring, kind of. I don't know what it means spiritually, maybe. I did learn about this a while ago. I'm trying to remember the information I'm remembering. But spiritually, he's replacing the older brother's child. He's continuing to be his descendant. Which will lead us to fascinating, I don't know if you call him son of so-and-so, but spiritually he's considered to be his child. It's very interesting, and we're going to see what takes place in today's Chumash. I want to share with the class one more interesting thing. There's a very important thing that comes from today's Chumash. And that is, I'm going to share with you, it's an interesting rule. That we know there's a major discussion, right, in modern day. When does life start? When does life begin? Right? At conception for abortion. This is the big discussion today, heated discussion in our country and everywhere else. When does life begin? Does life begin the moment the baby's in the first month of pregnancy? Is it 9 months of pregnancy? If you do abortion, is it considered murder? Right? So we have huge, one of the biggest debates in our country today. Pro-life, pro-choice. This is unto the Constitution, right? That's what they're all scared when Trump just nominated Barrett. What's her name? Will she change? What's it called? Wade versus Roe versus Wade. I think is that the name of the legal decision, and that's a huge debate. But nobody goes as far as Torah is going to go today. Now, we're not going to consider it literally death, murder, but Torah will argue today a very famous rule, and Kabbalah holds it very serious, is that even at the moment that the male has an emission that is considered life before it even goes into the woman. And therefore, we're going to learn in today's Chumash. Today's Chumash is the source of it. It all comes from here, from today's Chumash, which we're going to learn today. For a man to waste his seed is a terrible, terrible sin. Terrible sin. It's not brought in halacha. I don't think you can't be held capital punishment. I don't believe there's lashes even for it or so on. But there is life. We're going to see it from the story in today's Chumash. There's life at that moment. And the moment it needs to go into the woman, into his wife, in order for that life, the neshama, the soul that's there in the seed of the male at that time, must go into the woman in order for the soul to go. Otherwise, he took a soul and he committed spiritually a kind of a murder was actually committed at that point in time. Fascinating idea. It's not brought down in halacha clearly. However, in Kabbalah and in Musar, it's a terrible thing to do, very, very severe. And the source is from today's Chumash, so we're going to see another very fascinating idea, the Roe versus Wade. In Judaism, we believe you're not allowed to even, the male's not allowed to even waste seed. And that is from today's Chumash. So let's start. As I told you today, again, we have a packed class, fascinating stuff, and we're going to learn that today in our class. Here we go. Let's see what today's Chumash talks about. Okay. It was at that time, after the sale of Joseph, and Yaakov is mourning terribly, as we got into the whole conversation yesterday. We're moving right along. V'yered Yehuda meis Echav. And one of the brothers, which one? Yehuda, is demoted by his brothers. Yehuda is in a bad position. He's demoted. They lost respect for this guy. This guy, Yehuda, was like, of all the brothers, they looked up to him for guidance, they trusted him, they believed in him. He was the brother who they looked up to. I guess Yosef was the one they hated, and Yehuda was the one who they really had an ear for him. They listened to Yehuda. And Yehuda lost his prestige. He lost his value. Rashi will tell us in a moment. Why? Vayet ad ish adulami. So where did Yehuda go? He met an Adulamite man, a guy from, I guess, an Adulamite man, a certain area. Ushma Chira, and his name was Chira. So he goes and he gets a business partner. He goes and goes into business with Yehuda. Let's just see what Rashi says. Why did Yehuda lose his position? So some of you might have already guessed it. The brothers were really angry at him because they told Yehuda, look how much dad is suffering. They regretted their decision. Look what we did to dad. We sold our brother. He thinks he's dead. We made a promise that we're not going to tell him. Here our father is suffering and torture, and we blame you, Yehuda. Why did Yehuda get the blame? Because Yehuda was the instigator. He was the guy that they all listened to. And when Yehuda says we should sell him instead of killing him, they all followed along. So Yehuda seemed to be the one that the brothers put the onus on. They told Yehuda, we're holding you responsible. It was your idea. We're holding you responsible here. Because had you told us to return to dad, we would have listened to you. Look how we listened to you when you told us to sell him. You are the one that's responsible, and they regretted. So we do see the brothers regretted their decision that they made up the story to their father. Last night in our class, we discussed, well, if they regretted, why didn't they tell their dad? We're not going to get into that now. But the fact is, they regretted it, and they're upset at Yehuda, and Yehuda's now looked down upon by his brothers. So what does Yehuda do? He leaves. He gets out of town. He chucks out of town, leaves his brothers, and he goes into business with a guy called Chira, who's an Adulamite man. So he goes and he moves into business, and now he leaves his brothers and not with the family shepherding business anymore, leaves the family business, leaves the family environment, and moves out of town and goes on to do business with a buddy, makes up friends with a buddy called Chira, and Adulamite man, and he goes to do business with him. And this story takes place, they're a fascinating story. But Yarshim Yehuda sees where he goes to do business. Bas Ish Kenani, he sees a woman who was a merchant. He meets up another merchant over there. He sees the daughter of another merchant. Rashi is going to tell us later, very interesting, that this girl was a chashiv, an important yichus, came from an important family. Her grandfather or father was Shem, was the son of Noach. She came from, he met up with a very royalty, a very important family. They were considered like Kohanim, even Rashi tells us. They were like, he meets a very prestigious girl. So the Yehuda doesn't marry a local Canaanite girl. He goes and he marries a daughter of a Canaanite, a merchant person that lives in that area. But she's really the daughter or granddaughter of the famous holy Shem, whose yeshiva had a great name, who Yaakov learned in the yeshiva. Ushmo Shua. What was the name of the businessman he met? The guy's name was Shua. So he meets he's going to do business with Chira. He meets another guy in the business field, a merchant called Shua, in their business dealings, and he has a daughter, and he wants to marry this daughter. He took her and he married her, and he had children with her. So Yehuda leaves his brothers, moves on to business with other people, and he meets another merchant there, marries the guy's daughter, and has 3 children with her. And the verse tells us, he has a son whose name is Er. Son number 1. Then he goes into son number 2, verse 4. Er and Oinon, and he finally has a 3rd child. Has another child, and it's a 3rd boy. So he has 3 sons, 1, 2, 3. And as she gives birth to, as his wife, the daughter of this merchant, gives birth to the 3rd son, they call him Sheila. And Sheila and Chsiv means that she stopped giving birth. She stopped having children. So 3 boys is what Yehuda got from this girl. And at that time, the children stopped coming out. And this is Yehuda's family. So Yehuda's living away from his brothers with his Adulamite man. And he's doing business with him. He marries a girl and he has 3 children. And the names are Er, Onan, and Sheila. So what happens to these boys? Why is the Torah telling us this whole story with all the boys and the names of his children and how many children he has? Yehuda Isha, the Er starts getting older. He's got to find a wife for Er. I'm sorry guys, I got to correct myself. I mixed up 2 things. He did not marry the granddaughter of Shem. He did not marry, I mentioned before, he did not marry the granddaughter of Shem. He married a local merchant's daughter. That had nothing to do with being prestigious family. The girl now that he's going to marry to his son, that's the prestigious girl. That's the one. Then his daughter-in-law is the one that comes from this prestigious family. He takes a woman for his son Er, Bechoro, who's his firstborn son, Tamar. Tamar, everybody knows the name Tamar. It's the first time we see in the Torah this name. So he sees this girl, Tamar. Tamar is the granddaughter of Shem, from a very prestigious family, and he marries his son to this girl. Yehuda, Ra be'enei Hashem. The firstborn son of Yehuda, Er, was evil in God's eyes. Vayamiseu Hashem, and Hashem killed him. He died. He died young. He marries this woman and he dies. Marries this woman and he dies. I want to read on just because Rashi is going to help us figure out what was so bad about him. But let's read on. So Yehuda tells his next son Oinon. So Er's died, and now he wants to do the levirate marriage. So Oinon, he tells Onan, the second son, boy, go marry your sister-in-law, your brother's wife, and do the levirate marriage. And your child will be considered the child of his older brother. So look what he says there. This is Lisa. You asked me how literal is it, and it seems like the second son Oinon took this very literally. Oinon knew this child won't be his child. It'll be he's going to go and have a child, but it won't even be considered his child. And it was because I guess they had to get married, but he didn't want to have a child with her because he didn't want the child to be not his child. So when he came to his wife to have intimacy with his wife, his brother's wife, now his wife, Vashiches Arza, he wasted his seed, his semen, the vilti nasan zera la'achiv, so he should not give a seed to his brother. He would waste his seed. At the time came, in order that she shouldn't become pregnant, when it came to the point when so the seed would impregnate her, he made itself that the seed would go waste on the ground and they wouldn't have any children. Vayera be'enei Hashem. And this was evil in God's eyes. Asher also that he did. And the verse says, Vayamas gam oisai. So God killed him too. So Einan goes and passes away. They're just married. He also gets killed. Now, from these words in the verse, that God killed him too, Rashi learns, going back, why did the first guy die? What did he do? Rashi implies that he did the same thing as the second brother did wrong. What did they do wrong? They wasted their semen. Why would the first brother not want to impregnate his wife? So Rashi says an interesting reason. He says she looked beautiful. He thought she was gorgeous and didn't want her to become pregnant, because if she'll become pregnant, she won't look as she looked before. And therefore, he did not want to impregnate her. So what would he do? He didn't want to impair her beauty, as Rashi says. He also, as soon as it came time to pregnant, when they were having intimacy, he went and he wasted his seed and he poured it on the ground and made sure that she never became pregnant. Today, I guess those days they didn't have contraceptives or whatever, protection. So what they did was, instead of the seed going into her, they put the seed on the ground. So because of this act of wasting seed, Hashem ends up killing both of these men young. First brother didn't want her to become pregnant because he didn't want to impair her beauty. And the second one didn't want her to become pregnant because not because of her beauty, but because he didn't want his seed to be considered his brother's child. Obviously, he took it very serious that this child will really be the child of his older brother. Yeah, a fascinating story over here in what's going on. So, number one, although halacha, I don't think in Jewish law, it says it's prohibited, doesn't have a punishment or so on for these things. But one thing very interesting, and just pointing out, this is the source in Torah why wasting seed is a very big problem. So it's fascinating. It's in today's Chumash. If you ever wonder where it's from, Torah would tell you, if you went to a rabbi and said, am I allowed to have, there are times where it's allowed to have abortion when it's killing the baby, when it could be killing the mother. There could be cases. Torah obviously is against it. It's a very bad thing. There's possible to have cases, but the rabbi would tell you, you shouldn't be having even a seed if it's going to go to waste. That's already obviously enough that Hashem made both these people pass away young. But now, that's it with this idea. We're going to move on. What happens? This is not the story for today. We got to see what happens. Yehuda has a problem now, because he doesn't know that the reason Hashem killed them was because they're wasting their seed. All he knows is that he married both his sons off to a girl, same girl. And within a short amount of time, before they could even have a child, his kids dropped dead. So what does he do? But there's a mitzvah of a levirate marriage. So Yehuda tells his daughter-in-law Tamar, Kalasai, his daughter-in-law, he doesn't know what to do. He says, Shvi almana beis avicha, wait as a widow, both your husbands died. Wait as a widow in your father's home. Go home. Go back to your dad. Go back to your parents. Move back into your parents' house. I know you were living with my son. My sons were taking care of you. Go back home. Ad yigdal Sheila. Wait until Sheila, his third son, that the only one left, is an adult. He's still he's so young, he can't marry you. Go back. Ki amar penyamas kamhu, but really in his mind, he didn't really want her ever to marry him. Because he says, I don't know what happened. Twice already, I give my son to this girl, and he come back dead. I'm not giving my third son to this guy. So Tamar went, and she went to her father's house. Rashi tells us it was above him, as we say. Doche bekash. He was using an excuse. He never planned to have his son marry her. The commentaries say, well, why don't you just tell her straight out now that he's not going to marry her? Say, go find someone else, another husband. He didn't want to make her feel bad yet. The kid wasn't even bar mitzvah yet, so we couldn't even perform the levirate marriage or the chalitza divorce ceremony that needs to be done. She anyway had to wait. He figured, you know what, let me give her time. I'm not going to be honest with her now. The kid's just a kid. How could I marry the two off? Go back home to your dad's house. We'll talk. Come back and we'll talk then. And she's a murderer. That's what the father thinks. Who knows what she's putting in his supper, right? Who knows what she's giving these guys for supper? She marries her two sons and they both come back in a body bag. So who knows what's going on here? So Vayir bo yamim, many days go by, but Thomas bas Shua Eshes Yehuda, Yehuda's wife, passes away. Remember, he married the daughter of a merchant called Shua, and this daughter of the merchant that he married that had the 3 sons, their mother passes away, his wife passes away. By Yenachem Yehuda, Yehuda got consoled after obviously mourning for his wife. But Yavel gives a tzaynoi. He went to share his sheep. Went to, I guess, in their merchant, in their business, they had sheep. And he went to the sheep shearers. They would, I guess, bring all their sheep to the sheep shearers. And he went to watch over the sheep shearers and his sheep, what's that time of year, whatever, that's what the business was going on. He went to, with his business partner, Chira, the Adulamite, and they went to Timnah. They went to a place called Timnah. So they go to this town called Timnah, and he's going with his business partner, and they're going on a trip. They're going on a business trip. They're going to watch the sheep be sheared. And here's where it gets very interesting. But you got the Tamar Lamar. Tamar finds out her esteemed, prestigious father-in-law, the royal Yehuda. Everybody knows Yehuda, the son of Yaakov, this very famous holy man, is coming to town, to Timnah, where she lives. Chamicha, your father-in-law is coming to Timnah, to share his sheep. He's going on, and Rashi tells us that this place, Timnah, was in the middle of the slope of a mountain, because by Shimshon in the Tanakh, it'll say Shimshon went down to Timnah. Here it says they're going up to Timnah. Because Rashi explains, why is the contradiction? Is it up or down? It's on a slope. It's on a big mountain, I guess. So if either you could be going down, you could be going up. So the traveling, he's going up to Timnah to share his sheep. What does she do? She realizes, Rashi tells us, that the father-in-law is not going to marry her to his son Shelah. He realized there's monkey business going on here. The father-in-law made up a story, told her go home to your parents, but really he's scared he's not going to give her son Shelah. It's too long. He should have already contacted her, called her up. The girl's waiting and waiting, and nobody's calling him. Meanwhile, she's bound to a marriage she's not allowed to marry anybody else because she's bound to the previous marriage. But also, we'll see, she really, really, really wants to have a child with this family, because everybody in the world at that time knew that this is the future of the Jewish people. If the girl can only marry in to this family, her child will be the future descendants of the Jewish people. That's amazing. This will be the future identity of the Jewish nation. So this girl, more than anybody else, wants to marry somebody in the family. But 2 boys died. They didn't want to have kids with her. Wasn't her fault. And she's not giving up. So what does she do? She removes her. There must have been clothes that if you were a widow you wore. There were certain clothes in those days, I guess was the custom. If you were a widow that you wore, may Allah, she takes off her clothes. But the chas b'tzayiv, she covers herself with a garb, some kind of a face garb. But this aleph, and she sat with her face covered. She sat at the crossroads. Asher al derech Timnasa, that's on the road to Timnah. So she knows Yehuda's coming up this highway. She knows Yehuda's going to have to pass by. She disguises herself that Yehuda won't know who she is. Because she saw that Shelah, the younger son, had already grown up. And he wasn't giving him to her as a wife. So Yehuda's obviously procrastinating here. Doesn't want her to marry each other. So this girl goes and she concocts a whole plan. She goes, either Rashi says even, she sat where Abraham, remember Abraham used to live, had this very busy tent because people would come by and he would invite in guests and teach them about Hashem. She goes to that area, like a very busy crossroad place where everybody would be. And she sits in that area and she knows she's going to meet up with Yehuda. Yehuda's going to have to meet up with her. And because all she wanted was to have children from the Jewish nation, what she does is, she's going to dress up like a prostitute in order to try and get Yehuda to marry her because she sees Shelah's not getting married to her. Vayar Yehuda, verse 15. Yehuda thinks she's a prostitute. He kisses up now by the way she covered her face. Or it can mean either, how did he not recognize his daughter-in-law? So Rashi says there's 2 ways to explain this. Either right now she dressed up in a covered face, or, which doesn't make so much sense because the prostitute would do the opposite, she was covered when she was Yehuda's daughter-in-law. She was an extremely modest person, and the father-in-law never really saw her, never really knew, so never got to see her close up, and therefore, when he'll meet her now, he won't know who she is. Either you can learn she's covered now, or she's uncovered, but the father-in-law never saw her uncovered, and therefore, he didn't know who she was. And she was so modest, the father-in-law never imagined that there's no way that this girl could be it. Verse 16, and Yehuda came to her. Now, The commentaries all ask the question, how could Yehuda, who's a royal, dignified man, end up with the prostitute? And there's many answers. I'm not going to get into all of it now. He asked her first if she's married and made him maybe a marriage ceremony. It wasn't full on and so on. And however, or some of them say this is what Hashem wanted and Hashem forced him. He had no choice. Usually man has a choice, but God knew, wanted this to be destiny, and against Yehuda's will, he was drawn in a way that he had no control over himself. But here, let's go on the fascinating story. He tells her, Havana avoy alayich, prepare yourself, come to me. In the Torah is testifying, he didn't know it was his daughter-in-law. So she's very smart, and she tells him, what will you give me? What are you going to pay me? That you'll be with me. You want me to, even if it did a marriage, son, whatever it is, what are you paying me? What are you going to pay me for my services? Verse 17. So he says, what am I going to pay you? I'll pay you a kid from the herd. From the sheep. He says, fine, I'll take your payment. You're selling a goat, a sheep, whatever for the services. But you don't have it with you now. What are you going to give me now? I want a guarantee. I want a mashkan. I want a guarantee. I want a security that you're going to actually pay me. Give me something now. She's very smart. She's planning it on. He says, what should I give you? What do you want me to give you? That should be a guarantee till I give you payment. I want chisamcha. She says, I want your seal. They had a seal that they would use as a signature ring in those days. Upsilcha. And I want your cloak. Umatcha. And I want the staff. Asher biyadecha. That is in your hand. I want your personal staff. I want your personal signet ring. And I want your coat. And he gave it to her. He was intimate with her. And from that time that they were together, she became pregnant. And her dream comes true. All she wants is to have Jewish children from this famous Jewish family. And Hashem fulfilled her wish. She came from a very pure, holy place. And as I mentioned before, the levirate marriage would work with anyone, even a father-in-law was okay. It was a mitzvah, perhaps, even to continue the name of the child that was lost after the Torah is given. God forbid, it cannot be a father-in-law; it could only be a younger brother. But in those days, it seems to be that prior to Torah's times, this was the style. This is the way to do it. And she had tremendous tzaddikim come out from this marriage, like we'll see soon. Mashiach will come from actually this marriage, because the drive that this woman had to have father children of the Jewish people, the mother children of the Jewish people, together with Yehuda's DNA, who was the king of the Jewish people, will bring the coming actually. So from this crazy marriage seemingly here, will come out tremendously good things. Let's see what happens. So she leaves. She removes her clothing or prostitute clothing, whatever it is, whatever she was wearing, her hidden clothing, her veil. So she goes, she puts back on her widow clothes. So Yehuda has to keep his part of the deal. He sends the kid goat, Adulami, in the hand of this Adulite man, his friend, his business partner, the Adulite man, to take back the guarantee. He needs a signet ring back. He needs his coat. His staff, they couldn't find a woman. So they start looking around town. Anybody know where the prostitute is? Where is this? And by the way, they call her Kaddish, this removed woman. She was prepared for prostitution. She was on the crossroads. She was sitting right there. And everybody says, we don't know what you're talking about. There was no prostitute here. I don't know what you're saying. There's nobody here. There's nobody who lives in this area. The services that you're talking about, the woman has vanished. There's nobody here like that. So they come back to Yehuda. The friend says, I went to do your dirty work here, whatever. I went to find this woman. I didn't find her. The people locals are saying there's no prostitute like that. And they say it's not a true story, never happened. So Yehuda says to his friend, Tikach la penia lavuz. Let's stop looking for her because it's going to become very embarrassing. So everybody's going to find out that Yehuda is looking for the local prostitute in town, and it's not true. And the more people were asking because we can't find her, it looks very bad. I did my part. I kept my word. I sent the goat, and you couldn't find her. So we looked. we're off. We don't have to keep on embarrassing ourselves here, looking around and telling everybody about, we're going to kind of laughing stock over here in town of the people of Yehuda looking for this woman. Now, it's just interesting. I don't know if Rashi says it here, or I saw this in another commentary. Yeah, look what Rashi says. Very interesting here. He says this is all about a goat. What's with this goat that he's supposed to give? He says, if you remember, the brothers concocted a plan to make it look like Yosef died, and they by sticking his coat, if you remember, in goat's blood. So here is where Hashem is punishing Yehuda, because it was Yehuda's was the one. I guess you see, Yehuda was the one who concocted this plan to lie to their father and tell him that their son was killed and his father's suffering now was his idea to make up the story. So now, very interestingly, he's being punished with exactly the deception that he made to his father. He himself is suffering now from the goat. And what happens? So now, it's a little under 3 months. What happens once a woman becomes pregnant for about 3 months? All of a sudden, people start realizing that she has a baby in her. She starts showing that she's pregnant. But you got Yehuda. And Yehuda finds out his daughter-in-law, Lema, and they say, your daughter-in-law is pregnant. Zansa Tamar Kalascha. She had committed adultery. She never got a divorce from the younger son, Sheila. In Jewish law, the girl whose man passed away is automatically committed to the younger brother, and he needs a divorce. And she has a child out of wedlock here, and she's officially committed to your younger son. Not just did she commit adultery, but she's pregnant from the story. But Yehuda says, bring her out to you, obviously, sorry, and burn her. Capital punishment for committing adultery. And it's worse that this girl committed adultery because she's the daughter of Shem, the granddaughter of or daughter of Shem, and Shem is the Kohen. And in Jewish law, when a Kohen daughter commits adultery, it's worse than a regular Jewish girl committing adultery. It's considered not just as the punishment by the usual means of capital punishment, but it goes through burning. I believe it means pouring hot lead down the person's throat. It's a worse punishment because she's an embarrassment to the Kohanic family, which is she's committed a much greater harm. And therefore, this kind of adultery deserves the worst kind of capital punishment the family she's from. Take her out and burn her, but she's pregnant and out of wedlock. So now, but he doesn't know that it's his kid, actually. It was him. And actually, she hasn't violated Jewish law because she's supposed to have a levirate marriage with someone in the family, and she took advantage of it because he wasn't giving her his younger son to her. He might choice. She was taken out to be burnt. He shalch, on her way out, she sends El Chamir to her father. She says, I have a message from my father-in-law. Before you kill me, I have one last word. I want to deliver him a message as on her way to get her capital punishment. They're listening to Yehuda. Yehuda's the prestigious man in the town, and they're following his orders. So she says, Lamar, say to him, give him this package. And she sends the ring and the coat and the stick. And she says, just let him know that the baby I'm carrying is from this guy. Just let him know. And ask him if he recognizes who it is. Rashi learns an amazing message from here. Amazing message. She never spilled the beans. She never said, she could have easily told the defense, Yehuda, it's his fault, and I'm pregnant to his kid, and I really don't deserve to die. She had a very good defense. She never mentioned the defense. Why didn't she tell the court the defense? All she did was something fascinating. She sent Yehuda the package and allowed him to be the one to open up about what really took place. She knew the whole time what took place. He didn't know. And she's not telling everybody what took place. To hide his embarrassment, she's sending, and even though she's about to be killed, she sends Yehuda the package, delivers him the package, and says, Yehuda, you should just know, do you recognize what this is? This is the guy that I'm pregnant from. Here we see a fascinating message in Rashi says, it says, the rabbis say that from here we learn a lesson in life, that it's better to fall into a fire than embarrass another person, right? I mean, this is a little bit extreme, but he's telling us how careful this girl was not to embarrass Yehuda. She left it up to him. She would have died if he wouldn't have admitted it. Instead of telling the court, she was ready to suffer punishment. Obviously, she's on an extremely high level, this girl, in all the ways that she's acting. She really wants to have the future of the Jewish people. She figures out a way to make it happen. She's coming from a very holy place, and she's even ready to die, not to embarrass this person. But she tells her father-in-law, you should know, I don't deserve death. If you kill me, you'll be now responsible for my death, that I don't deserve to die because I'm pregnant to a relative of my husband, which is okay. And more than that, you'll be killing the babies inside uterus. But she had no choice because there's no other way. Her father-in-law would have let her marry the younger brother. Yehuda recognized them. And he admitted his guilt. This is where Yehuda becomes amazing, because this is the best character to have in a person. We all do things that are wrong. This is an unbelievable lesson. Yehuda is going to be held in very high regards, deserving to be the king. Why? Because when a person makes a mistake, that happens to everybody. But when a person's ready to admit their mistake, that is where we become a moral and a what's the word? A mature. That's where we become a mature person. He says she's right. It was all my fault. I didn't give her to my son. I was the one who was wrong here. And there's two ways to understand this verse. Either he never saw her again, he never continued to be with her, or he didn't stop being with her. Two ways to do it. And that's what ended up happening. Now Rashi says she's right from me, meaning that it wasn't Yehuda saying she's right. A voice came out from Hashem, from heavens, and he said it was from God, this whole story. She was so modest in her father-in-law's house. I had a decree that kings should come out of her. So it was a perfect match. This girl deserved, a woman who's a very modest woman will have very prestigious children. Her children will be holy royalty. Yehuda is going to be the father of Mashiach, and the King David's throne will come from him. It was the perfect shidduch. The girl and the boy and kings had to come out of it. And Hashem says, a voice came out from heaven and said, this was all pre-planned and designated by Hashem because this marriage had to take place. And it was when she was giving birth, and she has twins inside of her. Now, the term used here, Rashi says she is from the verse indicates that she gave birth to 7 months. She had a premature birth, and unlike other cases, which they had the full 9 months. And another thing is the way twins are spelled in the Torah teaches us that they were both tzaddikim, unlike the previous twins we spoke about, where Rivka had one was Esav, which was a bad person, wicked, and a good person. Here, both of them will be tzaddikim. He gave birth, and one of them sticks out his hands. As soon as the baby sticks out its hand, I guess it's important to know who's the firstborn son. She put a crimson thread around his hand. Maybe this is where the idea comes from. You know, they put on babies. You ever saw they put the red band on babies? This is perhaps a source in Torah for this. So she right away puts the band on the hand. Tradition to say this is the one came out first. But then the baby pulled his hand back in before she gave birth to that child. Verse 29, as soon as he pulls his hand back in, the other brother jumps out quickly that doesn't have the band on his hand yet. And she says, why do you jump out so fast? Your brother was coming out, you when it came out first. And she called him Paretz, which means like tremendous strength, jumping with tremendous strength. And the next brother came out, they had the band because he was the original one that stuck his hand on first. And she called him Zarach. Rashi, just to finish, Rashi has a fascinating interpretation here to what does this represent. He says, it says the word yad, hand here 4 times. The hand's going in, the hand's going out. It says 4 times the hand there. There'll be a descendant from this kid Zarach who will do something bad. In the times of Joshua, the Jews will win every war and then will suffer a tremendous defeat. The reason they'll suffer that defeat is because Hashem said all the spoils that they get by the city of Jericho, when they go and conquer Jericho, all the spoils in that area should go to Hashem. No Jew should take any of the spoils for themselves personally. There was one guy there, of course, there's got to be one Jew. His name is here, the name's over here. Where's his name? Achon. Achon, of course, there was one Jew named Achon who couldn't hold himself in, and he stole. So Rashi says here that he stole 4 things. He stole a garment. He stole 2 pieces of silver that were weighed 200 shekels, two very expensive pieces of silver, and a wedge of gold. Or it could be either he stole 4 things from that story, which is famous, that Achan stole from there, or he stole stuff from 4 different wars, which he wasn't supposed to take. This guy he was a kleptomaniac. He kept on stealing from the wars that you're not supposed to take. And he's a great-grandson of this guy called Zarach. So this is with this hand thing. It's a little bit of prophesizing what's going to happen in the future. However, he called him Zarach because he's shining like the name of the band, the red crimson band that he was wearing. And that is the end of today's fascinating Chumash. I'm sorry it took so long. What time is it over here? But those who need to go, you've fulfilled your commitment of learning definitely a half hour. Those who can stay, again, we're going to take some questions on today's Chumash, and then we will go into a very fundamental part of Tanya following this. Yes, Ira.
Didn't Abraham say not to marry Canaanite women?
It's a great question. Very, very good question. Rashi, therefore, it's correct. Avram told his son Yitzchak not to marry Canaanite, Eliezer not to marry Canaanite.
Torah.
What?
It's in the Torah. Doesn't the Torah didn't
No. Abraham told his son and Isaac told his son. The question is, did Yaakov, and Yaakov was told by his father not to marry Canaanite women. So the question is, who did Yaakov's sons marry? This is the subject of debate. It's not clearly in the Torah. We don't know who they married. In today's Chumash, Rashi, it says clearly that Yehuda married a Canaanite woman. And
Right.
Rashi says she wasn't really Canaanite. Canaan could also mean a merchant. And he says, although the literal meaning of Canaanite is a Canaanite woman, he's saying over here it can't mean a merchant because the sons of Yaakov would not marry Canaanite girls. Very interesting. So you asked a great question.
But this is where you lose me, because if you take if everything in the Torah, every word matters so much, I don't understand why would there be that discrepancy, like the vagueness, if in a couple of chapters earlier it said not to marry Canaanite women, and then
it's not true. It never said, first of all, it's not true. It never said you're not allowed to marry.
No, Abraham.
Avram told Yitzchak to marry Canaanite woman. Yitzchak told Yaakov not to marry Canaanite woman. Right. That could be, it was only for the forefathers. It was not for these children. There was no prohibition. There was no prohibition. A lot of the commentaries learned that they would marry Canaanite women. 100%. There are those that say Yehuda was the only one who was not supposed to marry a Canaanite woman because he was going to be the king of the Jewish people, and therefore he himself had to follow his forefathers and not marry a Canaanite woman. But it's not true. I'm saying the premise to your question, I'm just answering because you're saying I'm losing you. It's not true. It's a wrong premise that they were not allowed to marry Canaanite women. That's not a true statement. Nobody said that. Yitzchak could not marry Canaanite women. Yaakov couldn't. And nobody said that the sons were not allowed to marry Canaanite women. Okay, so just to be clear, it's not really a problem with them marrying an actual Canaanite woman. There's nothing wrong. No one ever said they're not allowed to. A lot of the commentaries hold that all the brothers married Canaanite women. It doesn't say anywhere that the 12 sons of Yaakov couldn't marry Canaanite women. It happens to be, Ira, that Canaan could also mean a worker person. Okay, it also could mean a merchant. It does. That is what it means. And Rashi's saying, I want to translate it here as a merchant because I think Yehuda did not marry an actual Canaanite woman. But you could learn it's a Canaanite woman too. Okay, subject to commentary. There's a debate among the commentaries how to learn this, and Rashi's learning it like that. Yeah. Any other questions? Or yes. But great, Ira, great question. Great point that you're making. Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I have a question. If Yaakov Avinu had 2 concubines and Judah, his son, had relations with a woman sitting by the road when he was on a business trip, does that mean that halakhically you're allowed to have relations with a woman that you're not married to?
Start the question again. Just want to answer this right, so I get the whole question. What was the first part of the question?
Yaakov was married to Leah and Rachel. Is that correct?
Correct.
Did he ever get married to Zilpah and Bilhah? They were concubines?
It seems like it.
So he was, okay.
It seems like it was a ksuba. But they weren't prostitutes. That's still there. Even if they were concubines, whatever you want to call that, it's still not a prostitute. It's a different level. It's a whole different ballgame.
About his son then. So his son Judah went on a business trip, and then he thought he was having relations with
prostitute.
Right. So does that mean that it's okay?
Now, so some of the commentaries want to, a lot of you're asking a very good question. The commentaries address this question. It doesn't make sense for the great Yehuda to do something like that. So there's 2 or 3 different approaches how they address it. Number one is, it could be he met a prostitute and then married her. In other words, he came over to her and said, listen, are you married to any other guy? And she says, no. And he says, listen, let's get married. Let's do it as an official marriage. It doesn't say that they had intimacy in a prostitute way. It just says that he saw that her services were available, and he says, you know what, I don't do this kind of stuff, but I want to do an official wedding, an official marriage, and let's get married. So I believe that's how one of the commentaries answer your question. The other way the commentaries say is that Yehuda had no control over himself. It wasn't like him, and it wasn't something he would, God forbid, ever do. But Hashem wanted this marriage to take place, and I guess God could make a person go out of their control, and therefore he wasn't held responsible for it, because Hashem had wanted this marriage to take place, wanted this girl to have a child from the descendant, and if Yehuda wasn't giving his son to marry her, Hashem is going to force himself, Yehuda, to be the one to have the child together with her. So those are 2 approaches, the answers that I saw. It's a great question, excellent question. Those are 2 approaches to how I saw the Torah deals with your question. So either one, he actually maybe married her and made sure there was a kosher marriage, even though she was a prostitute. He ended up marrying the prostitute. And the other way is that he was duped into it. It was something that he did not have control over. Great question, excellent question. Yes. Anyone else? Any other questions or comments on today's Chumash? Okay. Yes, Ira. What? Terry, yes. Ira, you can't ask Terry's questions. Terry has to ask her own questions. I'm just kidding.
No, I just came in. I just
Yes.
said, you're rationalizing what you're saying about Yehuda and his daughter-in-law. You know, people have control. All of a sudden they have no control. What about today's society? How do you know God doesn't want somebody to have a kid through somebody else? I don't understand that. You know, you can't just make up saying, oh, God made up that Yehuda should have a kid, therefore he had no control of himself.
I'm not just making stuff up. I'm sharing with you what's the oral tradition that we got from Moshe Rabbeinu with the Torah. The Torah is lacking a lot of explanation to it, and Moshe Rabbeinu passed down the way to read these stories. So
yeah, these stories are stories to teach us that you shouldn't do such a thing, you know, or you shouldn't embarrass somebody, or you know, or whatever. But I don't see how you could say that, you know, Yehuda lost control because God wanted him to lose control. I understand that God does everything for a reason, and we're placed in all these things, but
you don't have to learn it this way, Terry. As I said yesterday, you're fine to see it in the negative light, and it's totally
it's not negative.
Yeah, it is. You're saying he did a horrible thing. It's fine.
I didn't say he did a horrible thing. I think that he did what they did then, those days.
I listen, I could see what you're saying. If you read the words and you say Yehuda did it, you're right. I'm not disagreeing with you. It does look like you could read it in that way. I'm not saying it's bad to look at it horrible. Yes, 100%. It's possible to view it in that way. Yes, I agree. I'm not disagreeing with you. I agree with you. It's definitely possible to view it in that way. My point is that the commentaries in tradition that are giving you the background to the story, right? The point is that the commentaries are giving back into the story, pass that in tradition information that I don't have, that we don't have, that they were passed down, this tradition. Now, I want to say what they say is it doesn't make sense for you, knowing Yehuda, it doesn't make sense that Yehuda did that. You understand? Knowing all about Yehuda and Yehuda's life, it doesn't fit with the Chumash that Yehuda would do something like that. So it's a good question. They're addressing it in that way. You could take the approach, every man could make a mistake. Even the great and almighty Yehuda could make a mistake, and he's mistaken. Yeah, you could take that approach. I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm totally fine with saying that. It does look like that in the simple context. It doesn't make sense from everything else Yehuda did in life that Yehuda would do something like. Just doesn't make sense. He's sitting in sackcloth mourning for what he did to his father, right? That's why he wasn't there. So the Torah is limited with the information it shares. I am just sharing with you. Rashi's not even making it up. Rashi's sharing with you other information we get from the oral tradition passed down. A lot of it's from Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai. So if you want to look,
I just have to say, and if you, I know this is off the topic, but when King David went for Bathsheba, right?
Correct.
He
King
got
David
it. Says it right there. It says God said that was not good.
No, but I'll tell you something else. By the way, King David is the great grandson of this guy. So there's something going on. You could argue there's something going on in the family over here with the DNA, that there's some story going on. Correct. King David is the great grandson of what's going on over here. But you could say that, or
But
you could say,
right then and there, it says God said this was bad.
and it says King David regretted it for the rest of his life, the mistake that he made. It says that King David.
He was.
Oh, Rabbi, but wait. First
Yes.
of all, God didn't say it wasn't good. It wasn't right. And I'll explain it, because they said that the commentary saying that it's wrong to say that it was a sin for David to do what he did, because Bathsheba was his from 7th day of creation. It's a commentary. You can read it. I can send
No,
it
but
to
there's
you.
more. I don't want to get the whole story.
There's more to it. There's more to it.
There's much more. I could defend David. David was the king, and he didn't have an affair with her. He sent the husband away to war, and only once he sent the husband away to war.
Right.
And when you went to war in those days, the husband had to give his wife a bill of divorce. I don't want to get into the whole story now, but David found the pretext to, and he found legality way to
But
make
it's
it.
the same kind of
Correct. It could be. I'm not disagreeing. I want to tell you something, because I know we're coming off from yesterday's class, which we discussed. I want to share something with you. The Rebbe always took the positive side of things.
take the negative.
I didn't say that. The Rebbe always took the positive side of things. And when the Rebbe saw someone doing something, he defended the person, was the greatest defense lawyer ever in history. The Rebbe saw people and defended them. So the Torah is vague, and the Torah is leaving you a way to explain both elements of the story. I'm not arguing that. What I'm saying is that, what am I saying? What I'm saying is, you could read it. I'm not disagreeing. If you want, hate, you could say he was a guy, and every guy messes up, and he messed up over here, and this is what happened. That's fine. You're not a heretic. If you read that in the Torah, that seems to be the simple interpretation. But if you read if you want to know background to the story, and you read the commentaries, it's a very hard time saying that Yehuda would do something like, doesn't make sense with this guy to do something like that. So we could either say, we have a few things. We know the Torah doesn't give us all the information. One of the commentaries want to say that he approached this woman, said, I have no wife, and I see that you're available. Let's get married. Let's do an official marriage. We don't know that he didn't do an official marriage after that, just because the Torah doesn't tell us. He could be went over there and said, look, I need to marry somebody. Will you marry me? And that's what took place. Or you don't like it, but some of the commentaries want to say, the great commentaries want to say, that as we see, Hashem says at the end of the story, I played this out, that it was me who arranged this whole thing, because I knew that this marriage had to take place, and Yehuda wasn't marrying off his son to this girl, so I made sure that this is what would come out. You don't have to learn it like that, but I'm sharing with you what the commentaries are saying. There's various ways to learn it, so it's all good. It's all good, and we're defending them, but we could look at it in negative if we want. It's just totally fine also.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
You very much. Great question and great point. Keep on going, and I'll share with you my perspective, and you'll share your perspective with it. So keep on challenging or questioning. It's perfectly fine. Anybody else? Any other question? Mitchell Burko saying this so quietly. He's like, oh no, I'm not saying anything. Okay, fine. Let us move on. We also provide entertainment here, not just Torah learning. We provide entertainment also. That is the end of today's Chumash. We're going to move on to today's class in Tanya. So join